Hello, my name is Dr. Daniel Stevenson. I'm a weed scientist with the LSU AgCenter. Today I'll be talking to you guys about weed management in soybeans, and you'll notice here on the slide this is my contact information and where I am located. First thing I want to talk to you guys about today is what is a weed? Really, people, they know what a weed is, but they don't truly know the definition. And all a weed is a plant that's growing out of place. And if you'll notice on the picture on the slide, that's a soybean field with corn growing in it. And so in this instance, corn is actually a weed. And when you think about it that way, you tend to understand what we tend to deal with, because in this situation, this corn would need to be controlled and managed in the soybean field because it would reduce the yield of soybeans. From a more practical standpoint, when you're dealing with a homeowner, Bermuda grass growing within a St. Augustine lawn, you would consider that Bermuda grass to be a weed, and vice versa. If St. Augustine is growing Bermuda grass, it would be considered a weed. Another is from this picture, palm amaranth growing in a cotton field. You can barely see the cotton that's growing in this field, but you see the man standing there with a great deal of palm amaranth that's in that field, and we will discuss that weed a little bit more in detail later. But in this instance, it is just a plant that's growing out of place. Now, how do we control these weeds? Now, the one thing that a lot of people will think about first off controlling weeds is just spray something. When you go to Home Depot and buy something, or Lowe's, or you're a farmer, got a farmer who buys it at the local co-op, just go spray something. But there are multiple other issues and ways for us to control weeds, and we're going to talk about these as we go through this process. The first one is called preventative. And we've all seen that when you buy crop seed, whether it be some wheat or rye or Bermuda grass seed from local co-op, you'll see on the tag there on the right is an example where it shows percent of weed seed, and then what noxious weed seed may very well be in that bag. So the whole point is that you buy weed-free crop seed. And that's one thing we need to talk to our growers about when you guys are addressing them, is that make sure you buy good quality weed-free, because that's preventative. You're preventing having this problem. So that's the one method of weed management. Another one is sanitation, which is exactly how the name implies, maintaining equipment clean so that you don't transfer weed seeds from one location to another once you're moving tillage equipment. For example, this picture here you see, there's some corn rows in there, but it is completely infested with Italian ryegrass. Now, what happened here? Italian ryegrass generally is a weed that grows on ditch banks. It began to encroach in the field, and the grower used his equipment, and as he or she was tilling, they moved it through their entire field. So therefore, they did not practice good sanitation. They could have tilled the area where the ryegrass would have been initially, stopped, completely cleaned, sanitized the equipment. It could be nothing more than using a broom to sweep it off, but that is one way that they could have practiced sanitation for preventative weed management. The next one is on your harvest equipment. And this also applies to spray equipment or any agricultural equipment that goes through a field that is infested with a weed. This cotton picker is going to drive directly through this palm amaranth that's in this cotton field. It could be a soybean field here with a combine, or a rice field for that example. He or she will infest their cotton picker or harvest equipment with this particular weed. When they move to the next location, they will take that weed seed to the new field, thus infesting that field. If they had to practice good sanitation, I understand they want to pick this cotton or harvest these soybeans, but stop and do your best to clean your equipment, to sanitize it before you move to a new field. Thus, that is another example of preventative weed management. A second one is called cultural. Now, this is more got to do less with sanitation. It's manipulation of the crop. And the first example is crop row spacing. I'd say probably the typical crop row spacing amongst our growers here in the state of Louisiana is on a 30 to a 38, 40-inch row. Well, down in South Louisiana and other places, they tend to plant soybeans in a narrow row, whether the soybean rows are 15 inches apart, 10 inches apart, 7.5 inches apart. So you see two pictures. The one there at the top is where the soybeans were planted in 7.5-inch row spacings. Down at the bottom is a 38-inch row. Now you can clearly see the amount of soil that's visible down through the soybeans. There's very little in the top, a great deal in the bottom. And what happens there is you actually get shading of the soil, so you're utilizing the actual shading, the canopy of the soybeans, to prevent weeds from emerging due to lack of light intercepting the weeds, and thus germination beginning with the weed seed. Another one is crop population. Say this wide row in this bottom picture. You may get a canopy coverage, but if you have very sparsely spaced crops, you still can have light get down to the soil, so it's the same principle from a shading. Now these two, there are recommendations that the LSU Ag Center has about proper row spacings, proper plant populations. I'm sure that's been discussed in another presentation. But the point is that helps you from a weed management standpoint with your proper planting from your cultural practices. Another cultural practice is crop rotation, which is consequently herbicide rotation. Now we will discuss herbicides in more detail here in a few minutes, but having a corn-cotton rotation or a cotton-soybean rotation or corn-soybean rotation or a rice-soybean rotation, you're able to rotate those crops, take advantage of your cultural practices, take advantage of your mechanical tillage practices, taking advantage of your herbicides for the herbicide rotation, that we're constantly keeping these weeds off balance. We're not doing the same thing over and over so that we can ultimately control these weeds. Another one is mechanical. You heard me make mention of it. Now this is the old standard hand pulling or hoeing, which I'm sure if you grew up on a farm like I did, you have spent many times out in the field pulling weeds. Some people say roguing is another slang for hand pulling, but that is one example of mechanical tillage or mechanical weed management. The second one is mowing crop residue. That is really popular following corn, where they will mow the field. Third one is burning. Now honestly, this is not a recommendation of the LSU Ag Center to burn a crop stubble, but there are a number of growers who will utilize burning to burn the crop stubble. Ultimately that kills weeds as well, but that can also be a double-edged sword. There are some weed seeds that dormancy is actually broken due to burning, but that is one method of mechanical weed control. The final one is tillage, and there's no slang saying that said there's no such thing as resistance to cold steel. Herbicides may not work, crop row spacings may not work, even sanitation may not work, but tillage will work with cold steel. And here's two examples from actually forming of beds there on your left with a set of hippers, and then on the right is the old standard cultivation with a cultivator growing in a cotton field, or that could be a soybean field. So those are some examples. So it's just not all about herbicides. There are multiple other ways to control weeds.